I'm Nathan Pearce from F5 Networks, and this is the second in a series of videos about SDN, software-defined networking. And once again, joining me is John Giacomoni. John, remind us what it is you do at F5.
Thank you, Nathan. So I am a senior architect, and I'm also the senior director of architecture, focusing on control management orchestration technologies. So spot on, SDN, private clouds, management, all that good stuff.
Excellent. I'll be honest, I asked John to say that because I can't remember his title. It's quite long. Not a surprise to anyone. So last time we spoke, which was not too long ago, we covered orchestration and automation and sort of how SDN, where it came from, how it began, the different flavors it took on.
Yes.
Some worked, some failed. How it's escalated above just being layer 2, 3, sort of, routing and switching to include application level services, which is obviously what F5 is all about. And then we started to get into the automation or orchestration, more importantly, and the benefits that's bringing organizations. So there's two of us, we talk with customers regularly. So I think it'd be really interesting if we just, shared some stories, what we've seen in the field, how it's been implemented, maybe some of the pitfalls to avoid. So I'll put you on the spot and let you go first. I mean, who have you been talking to? What have they been doing?
So recently I've been talking to some of the financial services where they're starting to build out very large private clouds where they're focusing more on application services. And the thing that kind of shocked me is often when you think about scale, you're thinking about hundreds of servers or maybe web monster scale where you have one application with tens, hundreds, or more thousands of servers. They're actually kind of operating at that scale, but they also have instead tens of thousands of applications.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay. In private data centers, it's single organization? Wow.
And this is just in the organization, and sometimes some of these larger firms also do things to what some of the other large firms do, and they lease their services and host other companies' technologies in their data centers. So they need these really strong systems that enforce all the appropriate firewalls for compliance reasons, security, and also so you don't break your neighbor's application, which is one of the big nightmares.
So this was what the Web 2.0 movement was all about, that we read about years ago, how you might see a single portal or a single interface, but it's made up of not just hundreds of servers, but hundreds of services, some not even in your own organization and data center, like you just mentioned, subscribed from another financial provider, making up that single portal. So while we see that simplicity of just service that we've subscribed to in the back end, I mean, that's hugely complex.
It's extremely complicated.
Okay, and so this is bringing benefit to these type of implementations.
Absolutely. And you have the full gamut of management technologies on-prem. You have some who buy their management system from, say, a VMware or a Cisco. Some start modifying OpenStack. Some actually have gone to the point where they started before OpenStack even came out, so precursor to all of these, and built their entire silo from the ground up.
Wow.
So they built their entire clouds. And this is all about doing things like the complicated problem of mapping a service to a specific machine. It seems easy, but there's actually a lot of details, especially in a virtual world. And then as we move towards bare metal and Dockerized or other containerized services, how do you map the service becomes really an important problem.
Yeah, okay. I can see how this actually, and this goes beyond just the whole time to value. So I mean, these organizations, like you said, there's many services being rolled out to make up a portal. But there's this kind of concept, and Docker's been a large part of this whole, how quickly can you spin up a new service? This whole spin and kill mentality. I need a service, I need it running really quickly, and I might not need it in an hour. I don't know yet. But how quick can the network handle all of that? And not just the connectivity of the network, so the ports, VLANs. We're talking about all the services, the security, identity access. How quick can that react to this need to spin and kill an instance?
Right. So at least I think you need to separate by different classes of users. There's more like the private cloud where you have, say, startups doing lots of experimentation where services come up and down potentially very, very quickly.
Okay.
In more of a classical, like financial, these applications need to come up quickly, but then they tend to stay there.
Okay.
And then you have all the way up to the service provider, which is another huge organization. And as we talked about in the previous part of the series, they're actually spinning up services on a per subscriber basis. So now you're doing whole chains that aren't really in applications, more it's a service chain that's being provisioned and torn down. That can be very rapid.
Wow.
So you have very different lifespans. So again, as we talked about last time, it's all about this pattern and this architecture about how you manage the network for yourself. It's not any one technology.
So the networks are very volatile these days, aren't they? I know volatile is typically a bad word, but But in this case, it's not. This volatility actually means that you're not wasting resources. There aren't resources sitting there idling when they're not used. We're no longer having to spec infrastructure based on worst case, because infrastructure is being shared across all these services that are only existing when desired, but equally non-existing, being removed when they're finished with. But simply doing that in a hypervisor tier, that just doesn't work, does it? Because the network is how they connect to these applications and all those services within the network.
Absolutely. So I think, but you hit something very important when you said that volatility was a bad term. What's important about that is that once you start adopting SDN design principles into your network, where you have central management, control, and orchestration, you can actually now rapidly change your network, and if anything goes wrong, you can roll back. So that volatility actually lets you move quickly, but you've hedged against your risk by saying, you know what, I can push a button and possibly reset the entire data center if it was catastrophic. So you take what could have been an outage of days, weeks, months, depending on the scale, and reduce it possibly down to minutes. You can just re-roll out everything.
So the agility that we're getting from a software-defined networking approach is actually making the volatility driven by business no longer be such a problem.
Exactly.
It's less scary.
Yes.
Okay. Some big words we come out with today. Okay, that's really cool. So, and any other, I mean, you mentioned financials. Have you been talking to any other organizations of late?
So, recently, not quite as much. There's obviously the big Fortune 50, very similar type of situation. We talked about in our previous one that they're focusing on how do they get all of their data centers to interact well, and how do they span their network across the globe in a way that you can reroute traffic to the nearest data center. So those are all important things. Had some conversations with service providers.
Service providers. So we talked last time about how there's almost these two parallel markets, service provider versus private data center. And service providers are kind of, well, they're actually in that data center market as well now, because they're adding services beyond connectivity.
Absolutely.
So there's some overlap, but there's also some differences there.
Correct.
So what are you seeing in the service provider space then?
So again, as you just mentioned, there's really two different worlds. One is their data center business, or bringing on services, value-added services they can use, but then there's also the data path services. And those are the ones that spin up really quickly, and this is why they need concepts like network functions virtualization, where they're virtual network functions, because they're rapidly provisioning and decommissioning service chains all the time. But NFV goes a little bit beyond the classic SDN and virtualization. It also starts laying out how you manage and orchestrate your services.
Okay, so that's interesting. NFV, like we only touched on it very briefly last time, because again, I think those terms keep getting used interchangeably, and they're actually a little bit different. So service providers, they're adding in functionality that it's not like I'm streaming an Office application from a provider. When you say, like, data services, this might be like video optimization or something based on the fact that I've come in on a small portable device and not on my Apple TV that's connected to a big screen. So it's that kind of cleverness, isn't it?
It's that class, although I think the focus now is more on security services, DDoS mitigation, network optimization services, routing, using access and identity in the network to be able to re-steer your traffic. It's a lot of these networking related services, and then you can also do things like parental controls. Again, it's like a security related function, which is useful when you have teenagers who like to use Facebook during their school time. Understand.
No, so yeah, we've got content control, those kind of things. But for the service provider, I mean, being able to spin these services up and down, again, it's the same benefit. They're not having to spec out their entire data center of functions for worst case. They can create based on demand. So there's that money saving aspect to it of just spinning up what's needed and when it's needed. But then they have a unique business as well, where they're adding things in that you could subscribe to. We talked a little bit about subscription levels. So that gives them like a gold, silver, bronze level of customer. So service providers then have this ability to, instead of just offering bandwidth, we've all seen that I get 25 meg with a 10 gig limit for the month. Now you've got extra services on top where I'm getting this, but also I'm going to prioritize video feed so that gets optimized all the time and never stutters. And with on-demand TV now, growing in popularity so much, look at Netflix and various others, that's quite important. I know it's important to me, definitely. So there's a lot of areas still. And
there are.
I think we potentially have even raised more questions, but I think that the right kind of questions, it's an approach, SDN.
It is.
It's not a
I want to make one more point back, circling back to the financials. We understand that the service providers are really massive. We understand the Fortune 50 are really massive. But there's a very important point for why SDN is so critical today and why we're moving towards management and orchestration, especially if you look at these private clouds these financials are building. So I kind of made the point that they may have tens of thousands of applications. But what's not clear is the number of instances of services that are being managed there.
Okay.
So if you just take, say, even a layer 4 firewall, or say a basic HA load balancer, just to provide high availability to those, you're going to need at least a pair of each of those services per application in each data center. Typically, requirements say that you have redundancy in another data center region, and then many of these applications are actually existing in multiple regions around the world at the same time.
Okay.
So you can have anywhere from, say, minimum of 4 instances of a layer 7 HA solution or firewall, 8, 12. So if you do the math, now you're talking hundreds of thousands of instances under management, and they're still managing them as separate components. So you want to have a view of your layer 4 firewall owned by the security team. The application team has much more control over the HA load balancers in front and other services. They're kind of partitioned out, but now this entire Mano system is managing hundreds of thousands of, possibly even millions when you add up all the services. The configs are simple. But there's a lot under management. How do you expose this? These are some of the big questions is, what do the APIs look like to these management systems? How do you quickly find the service? How do you present an application-oriented view to the application owners through a third-party management system?
That's interesting you mentioned through a third-party management system, because there's a real danger of everyone coming out with their own controller, and then we just have management silos for each different technology and vendor. And then what's the point of that? I mean, we've just moved the problem, haven't we, if we do that?
Yeah, basically what we've done is we've concentrated into a number of even bigger points of failure, and they're bigger points of failure because they're not talking, so one can stomp on the other. There has to be a root of some kind. As we've seen, the financials have either acquired one, modified one, or built their own from the ground up. But everything has to feed in, so there's one point that you understand the entire network and the entire data center.
That's a big problem to solve, isn't it?
It is.
But then that's why we're seeing this growth in more descriptive policies, where actually some of the intelligence is handled by the device delivering it, and therefore that central management isn't having to know about every single object and property of every object. Because, I mean, how would you scale that kind of solution?
So that's actually it's an interesting point, because it's still up in the air which way you want to go. The policy approach has a lot of advantages to it. But if you also think about for these large scale like financials, again, these large private clouds, their services are actually very simple. So it's actually not out of the realm of possibility of having the application owner specify the firewall rules they care about directly. Because it's going to be a handful of ACLs, it's going to be a handful of HA policies, it's going to be a very short list, but you're doing it at millions of objects. That's where the complexity comes in. Now, if you want to go to a more classic enterprise where you're managing everything through a handful of central firewalls, then yes, policy becomes really important, because specifying and debugging firewall rules, as I've done in a former life, is not something you want to do with. And I was just managing hundreds, not tens to hundreds of thousands, where a lot of these large-scale firewalls are actually operating at. Okay,
so there's still some complexities to kind of be decided, and I guess there's a lot of clever people like yourself spending all of their days thinking about these problems and what approach is going to be best for the customers. I suppose the best solution is just working with the customers still as we do, isn't it?
Yes.
We can't work this out in a lab. We kind of need to keep working closely with them and seeing what their problems are, what the biggest problems are to focus on.
There's also the ideal world and the real world that has organizational issues involved in it. So it's not just a technology solution. Again, this is how you build a data center to fit your business, not an ideal spherical cow-like business.
Okay. And that's a great point, touching back to what you said before about these policies that are derived from an application's needs. I mean, I think the SDN movement's been great for highlighting that the network and the application have been so separately run. Like applications coming out of development environments, these clinical labs that are perfect and thrown over to the fence to the network and then run, and then they blame each other that it doesn't perform, it doesn't scale, it's because they've been run in separate environments. But if we have this descriptive policy approach, if that ends up being the preferred way, at least that can know, well, it's got to spec to X concurrent users. And they should be able to determine from that it needs this big a network, it needs this big a firewall, it needs these elements but that's derived from the app, which, let's face it, is why we built the data center in the first place.
Yes.
It's for the app, not for the VLAN. And yeah, I think SDN's highlighting a lot of these problems that have not been addressed before. So yeah, we got some things to work out still, but
we do.
It's interesting. All right, one last quick question: the future. I know we're still defining the now, really, aren't we? There's a lot of that. Is that a bad question to ask? Where's this going to go? Totally automated systems. I mean, we talked about Terminator 3 and the rise of the machines last time. So I'm hoping that doesn't go that far.
Absolutely. And yes, the automation, as we described last time, has significant issues. Because again, even as you described in your policy, if you just specify 100% policy that's supposed to operate, there's no human check. There's no sanity that makes it easy to figure out what's happening. So again, this is why there's a lot of discussion that still has to happen on the difference between automation and intelligent orchestration that has debuggability and visibility into what's happening in your network. There's a lot still to be done there.
Yes, I think orchestration's a safer, much safer approach, right?
The other day, I kind of like the world of WALL-E, where there's actually a human in charge.
Okay.
But I get to still cruise on a little floating Barcalounger.
Excellent.
Watch TV.
I think we've just highlighted the difference in the kind of people we are. I talked about Terminator, and you've gone for WALL-E. So there's an insight for all of our viewers. Well, thanks for your time. It's been really great talking to you. And hopefully that's answered a lot of questions for our viewers, because I think SDN's been very confusing. I've been working on it for a while now, and it was definitely a big learning curve. And every time I thought I got it, someone would throw some other acronym in, and I'm back to square one, and it's all confusing again. So I'm really hoping that we've addressed a lot of those things, and we're gonna keep doing these conversations, and hopefully dispel a lot of these myths, and maybe help people just keep focused on what the bigger goal is, which is this whole time to market. How quick can I roll things out? How quick can I react when things have been rolled out? And how much can I reduce the risk of that new deployments and management of existing deployments? I mean, if we keep the focus back to those three things all the time instead of getting down some of these rabbit warrens, hopefully we'll have a much better future for data center networks and service providers.
Awesome.
Great stuff.
Looking forward to it.
Thanks, John. Thanks, everybody. You've been listening to Nathan Pearce and John Giacomoni from F5 Networks.